complete total amount that it cost me to move from Gainesville, Florida to Washington, D.C. post-grad, and that was... Hey guys! Today I want to go through everything I had to do to move here from Florida. I am officially in Washington, D.C., and my friend gave me the idea of explaining how I got here, how much it costs to move here, and basically all the small logistics behind moving from Florida, which is in the southeast, all the way up to Washington, D.C. Without further ado, let's get into it. Basically what I'm going to talk about is exactly how I did it, so how the whole process went, and then how much it costs to do everything I mentioned in the process, and then lastly how I actually paid for it. So how I was able to do that fresh out of college and what method I used to be able to get here and, you know, make it all work. So one of the things that I want to talk about is how I got this little bubby up here, because that made the process so much more complicated than I thought it was going to be. To start, I'm just going to say what I did to get up here. So first of all, I really didn't want to have to move all of my furniture myself. I lived in an unfurnished apartment my last 2 years of college, so my entire apartment was filled with my own furniture, and I could not be bothered trying to figure out how to get all of this on a moving truck by myself. So because of that, I knew I had to hire movers to load the moving truck and unload the moving truck. And to save money, I drove the truck myself from Florida to DC because I didn't want to have to pay an extra like $1,000 just to have someone else drive a truck for me. To me, that was the cheapest option. So that is how I got up here. I basically hired movers, they loaded up the moving truck, then I took the moving truck, drove it all the way up to DC. It took me one whole day to do it. I stayed in a hotel outside of DC in Virginia for one night, and then in the morning I drove into DC. It was only like 20 minutes away, and I had movers in DC meet me here to unload the truck into my apartment. So that is how I got all of my stuff here. It was a 15-foot moving truck, and it was probably about 60% full, so I could have gotten a smaller one, but this one had a ramp and it made the moving process a lot easier for the movers. I decided on the 15-foot because overall it just made more sense and it was more comfortable. So when I came up the first time, I did not bring my cat Boba with me. I didn't want to have her in the moving truck, and I didn't want to arrive at my apartment and have all the movers coming in and also have my cat here. For those of you who don't know, my cat is extremely anxious. She gets stressed really easily is the point, and I really didn't want her to be super anxious during this move because I knew this was a really big deal and I wanted it to just go as smooth as possible for me and for her. Because of that, I didn't take her with me the first time. So I had her stay with my mom down in Florida the whole time that I moved up here during the first trip that I took. And then after I had set up my whole apartment, so I unpacked all the boxes, put all the furniture exactly where I wanted it, and then I flew back home to Florida. I flew to Gainesville where my apartment was in college. I went to the University of Florida. I hadn't cleaned my apartment in Gainesville and I hadn't turned in my keys yet. So I went there, literally I flew back, arrived at like 2 p.m. My roommate in Gainesville picked me up and we literally finished the apartment in like 4 hours. Then we drove her car back to my hometown. So then from there, once we got back to our hometown, I spent a few nights with my mom, and then I packed up Boba's stuff. I packed up my cleaning supplies that I had left in my apartment in Gainesville, and I got a rental car through Enterprise and did a one-way rental, and I drove the entire way again back up to DC from Florida. So this time I was in South Florida, which is about 2.5 hours more of a drive than it was from Gainesville. So we got up even earlier basically, and we got my cat with me, and we jumped in the rental car and drove the entire way in one day. And it was extremely exhausting. That was a much more tiring trip than the first one for some reason. And we got to my apartment at about 10:30 at night, and we brought Boba up here, and then we went and dropped off the Enterprise rental car during an after hours drop off, which was really convenient and definitely saved on the cost. So I was able to literally do a one-day rental. And the only reason I was able to do that is because I picked up the rental car from an airport facility in Florida. So that in that case, they're usually opened close to 24 hours. It's different right now because of COVID, but overall they're open a lot later than like a normal Enterprise facility. So I was able to pick it up late at night, the night before I left. And then we woke up at like 5 a.m. and drove from 6 a.m. all the way to 10:30 p.m. It took a very long time, and I did an after hours drop off here in DC. So sorry I'm talking really fast, but I want to get through all the details really quickly so we can get into the actual cost. So at this point, I had my cat here, I was all moved in, and everything was unpacked. All of the moving pieces were done and everything was here. Now I'm gonna go back through and just talk about how much everything costs, because a lot of things people don't think about when they first get a job is how much it's gonna cost you to move. So if you're in the same state, it can obviously be a lot cheaper. But for me, since I was moving across multiple states, it's pretty far. It was a total of 776 miles to drive the length from Gainesville to DC. And then it was even more, closer to like 900 when it was coming from my hometown. So let's get into the cost. The first cost was the movers. So the movers that loaded my U-Haul truck in Gainesville cost me $160 for a 2-hour moving arrangement, and they had 2 guys moving stuff. And I also had rented furniture pads so that they could keep everything protected for the huge long drive that I was going to be taking with all of my furniture. And I rented the furniture pads through U-Haul, and that cost $10 for 1 dozen furniture pads, which ended up being enough for me. So that's how much it costs for the movers. The next cost was the actual U-Haul, and this was the most expensive cost out of everything that I paid for. The U-Haul rental, it was a 15-foot truck, and it cost $513, which included 4 days of use and 961 total miles that you could put on the truck. Now, you can't decrease the amount of days for this rental. You have to put where you're coming from and where you're dropping it off. So I put Gainesville, Florida to Washington, DC, and that is the cheapest I could get for that rental, even though I only had it for I think 2.5 days. So I only used half the amount of time that I was allowed, but I still had to pay the full $513. There's no way to get that cheaper. I also added to my trip SafeMove, which is $70, and SafeTrip, which is $5. Basically, that just is, first of all, insurance for all of your stuff. So if I did get in a wreck or rain damaged my stuff or any of those circumstances that they describe in the details for that, then U-Haul would cover it, and or the insurance company that they use would cover that cost, and I wouldn't be out all my stuff. And also SafeTrip was if anything happened, like I got a flat tire or the U-Haul broke down, U-Haul would send someone to come help us immediately, and it just seemed like the safest option. Although nothing ended up happening, I still invested that $75 just in case, and I definitely stand by that. I think that's a good choice. Okay, so the most disturbing cost out of all of these costs was the gas that I had to use to drive the U-Haul from Florida to DC. So the gas that I used cost a total of $173.14 for the entire drive, which again was only a 776 mile drive. That was an extremely high cost for gas. I knew it was going to be expensive, but until I added it up for this video, I was just so shocked in how much it cost me to drive this U-Haul up here. So it ended up being a lot of money for gas, and there really is just no way around that except to just, make sure you stop at cheap gas stations. You could use one of those apps to find the cheapest gas station around. We made sure to never stop at like an expensive area. So like anytime we were driving through a city, we wanted to make sure we got gas like in the outskirts of the city. You don't want to get gas like in DC or in Richmond or in any of the big cities that you drive through. Make sure you get gas in like a rural area because it's a lot cheaper. So the next cost was the hotel. So the hotel I stayed in Virginia outside of DC on the night before my lease started here in DC, that only cost $89.72. I'm sure it's probably much more expensive normally, but because of COVID, the hotel was extremely cheap. So that really saved me a lot of money. And then lastly, all the food that I purchased during that time, we pre-packed a lot of snacks and breakfast the first day. We got breakfast to go from the hotel on the second day. So really, we only purchased lunch and dinner during the drive. And I in total only spent around $12 on food because we pre-planned so much and brought so many snacks. Definitely bring as many snacks as you can to save money during your trip. The next cost was the movers in DC. So to my surprise, the movers who came to unload my furniture from the U-Haul and bring it into my apartment were actually cheaper than the movers in Gainesville. So I had the same thing, 2 guys, 2 hours, and it only cost me $130 here versus the $160 in Gainesville. So I was really happy about that, and both companies did a really good job. Overall, it was a really great experience, and they were really nice and super helpful. So can't complain there, and I didn't have to lift a finger, which was super, super helpful. After that, like I said, I stayed in DC, unpacked all my stuff, got my furniture where I wanted, and got rid of all the boxes in the apartment so that it was ready for my little kitty to be here and not get stressed out. So then I had to fly back to Florida. So the flight back to Florida cost $82.60, which again was way, way cheaper than it should have been. And it was definitely because of COVID. I was actually able to fly from DC to Gainesville, which normally would have cost an arm and a leg. From there, the next cost that was associated with my moving was driving from my hometown in South Florida all the way back up to DC with my cat. For that, I rented a Enterprise rental car. I did a one-way rental like I described, and in total that cost me $34.53, so not a bad amount. And the gas for that drive was only $53.36 in comparison to the $175 about that it cost me for the truck. Obviously, it's a lot cheaper. I made sure to get a small car instead of like an SUV to have the best gas mileage possible. And then during that trip, I spent about $21.69 on food when I came up the second time. So a little bit more than the first time, but like I said, it was like a longer drive, and for some reason it just felt so much more exhausting, and there was a lot of traffic and accidents. It wasn't a fun time. What you've all been curious about is the complete total amount that it cost me to move from Gainesville, Florida to Washington, D.C. post-grad, and that was $1,355. Quite a hefty sum of money just for the cost of actually moving here. That doesn't include the other costs that were associated, such as having to purchase some new items, or having to restock my fridge when I got here because I wasn't able to take all of the stuff from my fridge in Gainesville. Those things obviously even up the cost more. This is just the base amount that it cost me. Obviously, if I didn't come in 2 trips, it would have been cheaper, but that's just the reality of like how you have to travel with a pet or move with a pet. Is it's not going to be the cheapest, most easiest option, especially for me with my anxious cat. So, I mean, that's just how it was. When I got here for move-in, in case anyone's curious, I had to pay my prorated first month of rent. So I was moving in about a week into the month. So I had to pay about 3/4 of my monthly rent, as well as put down a security deposit that was equal to 1 month of rent. They base that off of your income and your previous credit history, and that is what I was told I would have to put. So I had to have that in a cashier's check form. Basically, I couldn't use any type of credit card or anything. It had to be cash. Now I'm going to talk about how I afforded all of this coming out of college. I did have student loans in college as well as some scholarships, and I was also working part-time through college, but I did not have the amount of money saved that I needed to have saved to come here and pay for the move, pay for the first month and the security deposit. I didn't have that amount of money readily available for me to afford this. So this is what I did. I'm not saying it's the best way to do it, but I'm being transparent and honest in saying how I did it and what I did to get here. I basically had to have about $1,300 ready to pay for moving expenses, as well as for basically 2 months of rent saved up in cash. So what I did was I got a credit card that had 0% interest for 15 months, and it had a really good reward for if you spent $2,000 in the first 2 months, you got a $500 credit on your account. So I got that credit card to basically be able to put all of my moving expenses on that card. Also, my company offered me a relocation stipend of $2,000 when I started, so I knew that once I started my job, which I'm starting my job about 1 month after I moved in and my lease started here in DC, so I knew that once I started my job, I would have that $2,000 to then pay off the credit card anyways. Again, I wanted a credit card that had no interest for a long period of time, just in case. You never know what happens. So that is how I afforded the moving expenses without any savings beforehand. And then for my first month of rent and my security deposit, I was really grateful that my mom was willing to lend me the money, which I really hate borrowing money from people, especially from my family. I am very independent and like to do things on my own, and it was not my favorite thing to have to borrow money from her, but I knew that I was going to be able to pay her back very quickly. So I was willing to ask her, and thankfully she was able to help me out and pay for that for now, and I already am coming up with that payment plan to pay her back as soon as I start work, which I'm starting work tomorrow. Yeah, I know that not everyone's able to do that, and there's definitely other options, but I would say overall the best option would be to save up money ahead of time because you want to be able to pay that yourself. That's your best option. My initial plan was to keep money from my loan that I got for my last semester of college to be able to use it, but then I ended up having to use it for other purposes, so I didn't have the money saved that I was planning on. That's what I did to be able to get here. It's not the best option. There's definitely better options. Think about it, talk to someone you trust to figure out what makes sense for you to do. It's really expensive post-grad trying to move to a new location, but I think overall it's really worth it. If you have any questions about post-grad or what you should do, I'm not a financial expert and I'm not gonna say that I am, but I'm definitely willing to help you out or talk about anything that comes with moving or any way to figure out logistically how you should move. Anyways, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I'm planning on making a video in the future that talks about the specifics of how much I make and how much I spend on this apartment here, and just be really transparent about my finances to help anyone who might want to see that, or get a better understanding of how much it costs to live in somewhere like Washington DC, or the cost associated with living on your own post-grad. So if you want to see that video, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content. I'm also starting my full-time job tomorrow, so I will be doing Work Week in My Life videos. And yeah, that's all I have for you. So thanks so much for watching. Bye. Look at this tiny kitten.